Hello everyone. Welcome to this lecture on free speech and its limits. This lecture is part of your paper on news and society. Free speech and its limits. So let us just start with the introduction. The right to freedom of speech and expression available to citizens usually comes with certain responsibilities. While availing the right to freedom of expression, one has to consider his responsibilities towards the state, the society, and other fellow citizens. As such, the freedom of expression is not absolute. It does not allow to express anything unmindful of its consequences, especially leading to violation of qualities of free speech intends to protect. National governments, therefore, while defining the freedom of expressions as a fundamental right, also put in place some limits in its exercise, which are often defined as reasonable restrictions. Further, in a multicultural society like India, the socio-cultural values are used to define decency and morality as a ground against freedom of expression. But grounds specified as reasonable restrictions are open to interpretation, which leaves scope for their misuse. Judicial interpretations, recommendations of relevant commissions and committees have attempted to clarify the status of freedom of expression and its limits so as to clear the air about the status of the right. This lecture has been designed to explain you the various nuances of the free speech and its limits. After the end of this lecture, you are expected to have a proper understanding of the meaning of free speech and its elements, the philosophical arguments in the defense of freedom of speech, provisions of law which guarantee the right of freedom of speech and expression and limits in India and other countries, judicial interpretations on constitutional status of freedom of press. So let us start with the concept of freedom of speech. Freedom means absence of control, interference, or restriction. Freedom of speech is the right to articulate one's opinion and ideas without any interference. Now here interference speaks of censorship or punishment. Therefore, freedom of speech as a human right is the right to express opinion publicly without censorship or fear of punishment. The punishment made through administrative action, judicial pronouncement, or societal boycott. This right is not limited to public speaking. Rather, it includes expression of opinion and ideas either verbally in writing or through any medium. A democratic system rests on public opinion, which cannot be formed without the right of free speech and the right to be informed. Unrestricted discussion facilitates multiplicity of views and discovery of truth. Freedom of expression encourages one to express beliefs which ultimately lead to self-fulfillment and personality development. Well-articulated right to free speech encourages one to participate in the democratic process without fear, whereas restriction reinforces a spiral of silence. A society can prosper only through contribution of idea to public questions by its various sections. Therefore, freedom of speech and expressions is recognized as the mother of all liberties. If freedom of speech is denied, all other freedoms are incomplete. But sometimes, free expression of ideas cause inconvenience to rulers and threaten the status quo. Therefore, the forces of freedom favor free speech, but authoritarian rulers want restriction on that freedom. In other words, sometimes freedom of speech is viewed as a privilege to be enjoyed, but at other times it is considered as the problem to be dealt with strongly. Therefore, from antiquity, the right for free expression continues. Now let us discuss what is the international status of right to freedom of speech and expression. Freedom of speech got recognition as a basic human right in 1948 when the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted. Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states that everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas through any media and regardless of frontiers. The degree of freedom of speech available in practice varies greatly across nations. In nations with authoritarian forms of government, freedom of speech is limited as censorship is prevalent. But in liberal democracies, a higher degree of freedom of speech is available as it is protected from government interference. In the United States, the citizens enjoy highest degree of freedom of expression as it is protected by the First Amendment to the Constitution from government interference. The First Amendment says, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of expression or of the press. This amendment was meant to preempt any law which intended to impose restriction on freedom of expression. In the United Kingdom, the right to freedom of speech happens to be in a weak footing under the common law. It adopted the right to freedom of expression guaranteed under Article 10 of the European Convention to its domestic law. But the range of restrictions provided under other provisions of law severely reduces its scope. Now let us discuss the right to freedom of speech and expression in India. The primacy of freedom of speech and expression is evident in the preamble to the Indian Constitution, which assures to secure all its citizens liberty of thought and expressions. In order to give effect to this objective, freedom of speech and expression has been guaranteed as a fundamental right under the Article 19(1)(a) available to all citizens, subject only to the restrictions which may be imposed by the state under Clause 2 of that article. It may be noted that the right granted under Article 19(1)(a) is available to Indian citizens and not citizens cannot claim that right. Further, the right is available against state action only and not against the actions of private citizens. This right to freedom of speech and expression includes within it the right to collect and receive information from anywhere and through any legitimate means, besides the right to disseminate information and express opinion. This right to freedom of speech and expression includes, as interpreted by the higher judiciary, freedom of press. Freedom of press has three important elements in it. First is the freedom of publication. Second, freedom of circulation. And lastly, it is freedom of access to all sources of information. Article 19(2) of the Indian Constitution reads, freedom of speech and expression guaranteed by Article 19(1)(a) shall not affect the operation of any existing law or prevent the state from making any law which imposes reasonable restrictions on the exercise of the freedom in the interest of sovereignty and integrity of India. The security of the state, friendly relations with foreign states, public order, decency or morality, or in relation to contempt of court, defamation or incitement to an offence. The restrictions must have a direct nexus with the ground on which they are imposed and should also not be in excess of the purpose sought to be achieved or supplant the freedom itself. So let us discuss all these clauses one by one. The first one is sovereignty and integrity of India. Any attempt by any territorial unit of the country either to secede and form an independent state or to integrate with a foreign state constitute a threat to the sovereignty and integrity of India, and no government can allow such actions. The Dravida Kazhagam in South India, plebiscite front in Kashmir, the Khalistan movement in Punjab were involved in such activities. To control any activity, restriction can be imposed on the right to freedom of speech and expression. This ground of restriction was incorporated through the First Amendment to control such attempts in parts of the country. This provision conferred constitutional validity on the sections of Criminal Law Amendment Act 1961, Unlawful Activities Prevention Act 1967, and the Official Secrets Act 1923, which prohibited various types of expression considered as detrimental to the integrity of the nation. The Criminal Law Amendment Act 1961 provides for punishment for speech acts prejudicial to the interests of the safety and security of India. The Official Secrets Act 1923 also provides for punishment for publication of official secrets which is likely to affect the sovereignty and integrity of India. Second is security of state. Self-protection from external as well as internal threats constitutes security of the state. Security of the state implies only serious and aggravated forms of public order, that is rebellion, waging war against the state, insurrection, and not ordinary breaches of public order and public safety. The state may impose restrictions on freedom of expression insofar as it is necessary to protect itself from external attack of a foreign nation or internal attempts through violent means to overthrow the government. Expression which interferes with the war efforts of the nation, inciting resistance to participation by the state in war, undermine the morale of the armed forces, disclose war strategy of the nation so as to help the enemy, advocate overthrow of the government by force or violence, and the like may be restricted. Now the third clause is friendly relations with foreign states. Now this was incorporated as a ground for restriction of free speech through the First Amendment to deal with any attempt on part of citizens to endanger friendly relations with a friendly foreign state. It was intended to prohibit unrestrained malicious propaganda against a foreign friendly state, which excludes except some states member of the Commonwealth including Pakistan. Now the fourth clause was public order. Public order has been interpreted to mean public peace, safety, and tranquility. Speech acts which promote enmity between different classes of citizens by words, either spoken or written, or by representation or otherwise, are considered offensive under Section 153A of the Indian Penal Code. Anything that disturbs public tranquility disturbs public peace. These are: first, unlawful assembly; second, rioting; third, promoting enmity between different classes; and fourth, affray. Speech acts such as A. Preaching communal hatred or feelings of enmity between different sections of the community. B. Expressions which deliberately insult or attempt to insult the religious beliefs of a class of citizens constitute grounds for restriction on freedom of expression. Public order also includes public safety. Offences against public safety would include creating internal disorder, interference with supply of essential commodities, inducing members of police to withhold their services or to commit breach of discipline, inducing public servants engaged in services essential to the life of community to withhold their services. As such, an expression which includes any of these actions justifies restriction. Now, the fifth clause is decency or morality. Matters which are likely to affect the society adversely cannot rightfully claim right to free speech. In this regard, Section 292, 293 and 394 of the Indian Penal Code provide for restriction on the freedom of expression in the interest of decency and morality. An American judgment accepted by the Indian Supreme Court in defining obscenity reads as: the test of obscenity is whether the tendency of the matter charged as obscenity is to deprave and corrupt whose minds are open to immoral influences and into whose hands a publication of this sort may fall. The propositions which have emerged from the recent decisions pertaining to obscenity are: it is not the intention of the writer but the effect on the readers which constitute the test of obscenity. That is, whether the matter in question is to corrupt those whose minds are open to such immoral influences and into whose hands a publication of this sort may fall. The effect of the publication on class of readers into whose hands it may fall rather than its effects on isolated reader has to be tested. In deciding the effect, the matter has to be considered with regards to the moral standards of the contemporary society. In deciding the obscene nature of a publication, the overall view of the entire work has to be considered. It is not sex as such, but the manner it is portrayed that makes a publication obscene. For example, picture of women in nude is not obscene unless there is something in the surrounding circumstances, the pose and the suggestive elements in the picture to excite impure thoughts in an ordinary or a decent-minded person. The tests of obscenity discussed above are applicable to books, other publications and films alike. Now let us come to contempt of court. In a democracy, judiciary is an important limb of the state. Respect for judiciary and its orders is essential for proper functioning of a state. Actions which amount to lower the credibility of judiciary need to be restricted. Restriction can be imposed if one crosses the boundaries of fair comment which amount to contempt of court. However, truth has been defined as a defense. Now the seventh issue is defamation. A statement which injures a person's reputation in public amounts to defamation, and it is ground for restriction on right to free speech. exposing a man to hatred, ridicule, or contempt in public, knowingly well that it will harm the reputation of the person, constitute defamation for the purpose of this clause. Now, the 8th clause is incitement to an offense. Incitement to an offense was incorporated as a ground of reasonable restriction on right to freedom of speech and expression by Constitution Act 1951. Any speech which incites people to commit an offense was included under this. Social media and freedom of expression. Now let us look at what is the status of social media and freedom of expression on it. The advent of the internet and Web 2.0 brought the greatest transformation in the mass media ever seen. The rise of social media, it has hugely expanded the scope for self-expression, eliminating the barriers of gatekeeping which prevails in the mainstream media. It has also hugely transformed media consumption by making it a two-way process, a participatory process rather. It has extended news publication from the confines of hugely organized formal media setups to the street and private spaces from where the citizen can express views. Now, this has hugely democratized media and expanded the scope of the right to express. One can use the digital multitasking devices like smartphones, PDAs, etc., powered by the internet to share his or her ideas with vast audience across national boundaries. The mushrooming growth of user-friendly social media application has virtually eliminated restrictions to free flow of information and ideas. Freedom of press in India. The press must be free to rightfully perform its roles of a critical commentator and an agenda builder. Denial of or limitations on this freedom would necessarily undermine the power of the press to influence public opinion. Having acknowledged this reality, the Indian leadership had a favorable view on freedom of press despite all its limitations. In India, there is no separate constitution provisional guaranteeing freedom of press. But the Supreme Court has time and again, in various cases like Express newspaper versus News in Union of India in 1959, Bennett Coleman versus Union of India in 1973, Indian Express versus Union of India in 1985, LIC versus Manubhai in 1993, has held that there is no need for a separate provision on freedom of press because it is already included in the guarantee of freedom of expression. It includes the liberty of publication and circulation through any medium of expression, including printing. Examining the constitutional guarantee on freedom of press, the Matthew Commission also concluded that no useful purpose will be served by inserting a separate provision in the Constitution on the freedom of press, as that concept is already embodied in the Article 19(1)(a), and by inserting such a provision, no particular benefit can be conferred on a non-citizen like a company. Freedom of press has three important elements. One, freedom of publication, freedom of circulation, and third, freedom of access to all sources of information. Freedom of press is subject to restrictions under Clause 2 of Article 19. The press being an industry and a business, it is also subject to restrictions under Article 19(6). From the position of law as in force, freedom is used to mean freedom from government. But threat to freedom of the press may also come from other agencies such as militants, religious fundamentalists, and regional pressure groups. Industries and newspaper proprietors with other businesses may also be potential threats to press freedom. Look at some important observations regarding the status of freedom of speech in India. First, since freedom of press flows from Article 19(1)(a), which is available to the citizens only, the press cannot claim any special privilege as distinct from those of citizens. Secondly, since the guarantee under Article 19(1)(a) is confined to citizens, a non-citizen running a newspaper is not entitled to the benefit of the liberty of press. Thirdly, since freedom of press as a fundamental right is available to citizens against state action only, the right cannot be used against interference in the press freedom by a private citizen, though the press may have a remedy under ordinary law of the land. A person, including the printer, publisher, or editor of a publication who is aggrieved by an infringement of this right by any law or by an executive order of the government, may apply for relief to the Supreme Court under Article 32(a) or to a High Court having jurisdictions under Article 226. An order imposing ban on the entry of the publication in certain territories or imposing pre-censorship on a publication may be challenged besides the constitutional validity of a law. Article 105(2) and 194(2) of the Constitution allow the publication of any person of any report, paper, or proceedings of the Parliament and the state legislature under the authority of those bodies. A general freedom to publish substantially true reports of proceedings in the Parliament and state legislature is also conferred by Article 361(a) of the Constitution, provided this is done in good faith in the defense of freedom of speech. English philosopher John Stuart Mill essay on liberty, published in 1859, has been referred to as the greatest of all statements in the cause of free speech. Strongly defending free speech, Mill has said, "If all mankind minus one were of one opinion and only one person was of the contrary opinion, mankind would be no more justified in silencing that one person than he, if he had the power, would be justified in silencing mankind." Mill claims that the fullest liberty of expression is required to push our arguments to their logical limits rather than the limits of social embarrassment. Such liberty of expression is necessary, he suggests, for the dignity of the persons. If liberty of expression is stifled, the price paid is sort of intellectual pacification that sacrifices the entire moral courage of the human mind. In his pamphlet Aeropagistesia, John Milton forcefully argued against government censorship and argued that the individual is capable of using reason to find out what is good and what is bad. Therefore, the individual must have unrestricted access to the ideas of others in a free and open encounter. In a democratic system, the public needs a great deal of information in order to make informed choices, and denying it would be a great disservice. Further, being servant of the people, the government should not be allowed to censor the public. Freedom of speech is not absolute. Freedom of speech cannot be absolute. It has to be limited because it is exercised in the context of competing values. If free speech is defended as a facilitator of autonomy, which is vital for a well-functioning democracy, then speech acts that undermine democracy cannot be defended. Therefore, such acts can be restricted by the state in the interest of the democracy. Alexander and Horton in 1984 noted that speech encapsulates many different activities: speaking, writing, singing, acting, burning flags, yelling on the street corner, advertising, threats, slander, and so on. Some of these forms of communications are more important compared to the others and hence deserve different levels of protection. For example, criticizing the government in a democratic system may be more acceptable than abusing a national flag. When two speech acts clash, one has to prioritize over the other, which means the right to speech cannot be unlimited. Therefore, it is unrealistic to claim unlimited right to free speech. It is only logical to debate its limits by deciding how much value we place on speech in relation to other important ideals such as privacy, security, democratic equality, and the prevention of harm. Advocates of free speech are frightened that the inevitable consequence of limiting speech could be a slide into censorship and tyranny. But supporters of public decency claim its absence may lead to anarchy. It is not very difficult to imagine the consequences of unrestrained flow of libellous statements, pornography, and disclosure of state secrets. Plato's polemics of art and artists urged strict censorship of the arts because of their influence on molding people's characters. Using his theory of forms, Plato claimed that the artists and poets couldn't usually explain their works, as they are seized by irrational inspiration, a sort of divine madness. In a country like India, with huge socio-cultural diversities, the free flow of unhealthy content may lead to moral pollution and dilution of our social values and traditional tenets, which will eventually lead to chaos and anarchy in the society. Now let us summarize what we studied in this lecture. The liberty of free expression is considered as the mother of all liberties, as it is fundamental to human existence. The Indian Constitution assures to protect liberty of expression as core value, which is evident in preamble. The Indian Constitution guarantees to all its citizens the right to freedom of speech and expression under Article 19(1)(a). Through it has explicitly articulated a separate right to freedom of press, interpretations of Supreme Court has time and again clarified that the Article 19(1)(a) contains freedom of the press. To ensure that while exercising this right, one does not harm other citizens, the society or the country, limits to this right has been provided. Article 19(2) provides 8 grounds of reasonable restrictions on the exercise of right to freedom of expression. We hope that this lecture helped you in understanding freedom of speech and expression holistically. Thank you.